Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of Lunchtime Learning. I'm delighted to be joined by Dan Rockwell, who is the co-author of The Vagrant, with John David Mann. And John was kindly on my podcast and highly recommended Dan. So I'm looking forward to our whole chat about leadership. Dan trains, coaches and mentors current and emerging leaders and managers, and has been doing so for the past 15 years. I believe you also the author of a Leadership Freak blog, which sounds a very interesting title. So I'm really grateful for your time, Dan. Thanks very much for joining this afternoon. Can I just ask, where did this interest in leadership come from and evolve?
As far as my interest in leadership and all of that?
Yes, please. Yeah, where did it come from?
Well, the short answer is dissatisfaction, Stephen. And thank you for having me here with you. I always thought, growing up, I thought I was a wonderful leader. And as I got older, I think we become a little more self-aware. And all of a sudden you realize you don't know quite as much as you thought you knew. And I was engaging in self-defeating behaviors, something that we all do, but because we don't intentionally harm ourselves. But I was engaging in self-defeating behaviors, and that's when I decided to start writing Leadership Freak. And wow, it changed our lives. I had no idea. I was just really writing for myself, if you know what I mean.
Great. So when you talk about self-defeating behaviors, what do you mean by that, please?
Sure. I know you deal with folks who are helping estates and, salespeople and all of that. And I think there's some relevance here as well. Some of my self-defeating behaviors, which, by the way, the protagonist in the book engages in self-defeating behaviors, they're all mine and more, except they're dramatized. You know what I'm saying? But they all originated with me. But we all do these kind of things. For example, showing up with an answer instead of showing up to learn. We think we know a lot, and if you're selling or if you're advising people in the legal profession, we can have a tendency to think we know everything that's going on, and we show up with an answer, and that's self-defeating. We need to show up with humility, and that includes being open and being curious, which took me a while to learn, because I showed up to convince people I knew what they should do.
Okay. And actually, I love what you say. For me, there's two types of people. There's the learn-it-alls and the know-it-alls. So for me, every single day is a learning day, and I'm very curious to learn. I know in the book you talk about wisdom a lot. So what do you think makes an exceptional leader?
Well, I think everything good in leadership, and maybe even in so many other areas, I think everything good in leadership does begin with humility. There are expressions of humility, for example, like, as you were saying, a drive to learn, a drive to develop skills. The leaders that I work with are all highly motivated to get better at what they do. I even work with one fellow. He's going to retire in 2 years, and I've been coaching him for about 8 or 9 years. He's one of my longest clients, and he is completely dedicated to be the best leader he can be right up to the last day that he's going to be at work. So I think a dedication to really excel and learn and be the best you can be. But there's this other side of leadership too, and that's showing up as your true self or as your best self, which I think does relate cross sectors. So it doesn't matter whether you're in estates or whether you're in healthcare or whatever. showing up to be your best self and not just being a people pleaser, I think is also part of it. There's a long list, but I'll stop there.
So do you think you're born to be a leader, or you can learn to be a leader?
Yes. I think some people do have some natural qualities that make them disposed to be leaders, especially in certain contexts. Some contexts require upfront leaders who have, a little more charisma. But we got to be very careful that we don't think because someone has charisma or an outgoing personality, that's going to make them a good leader. It won't necessarily. But we we are we're all born. So in one sense, all leaders are born. But I think the skills and strategies and behaviors that go with great leadership can be learned by any person with average intelligence.
Okay. So again, for yourself, when you first started, the lessons in your life, what 2 or 3 lessons have you learned that you've brought into The Vagrant, your new book that you've co-authored with John?
Well, I'm going to say the one that's on the top of my mind most frequently. And one of the things I've learned, and it took me a long while to learn, is to bring the outside in. I'm more of an introvert than an extrovert. I like my own company. I'm fine being by myself. And life, that's great. There's a place for that. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not ashamed of that. But I found that my life began to expand as I started inviting people in. And John David Mann is an example of this, which I think we started about 3 years ago on this project. And I had this story of the Vagrant in my head and heart because I knew I had done a lot of things that didn't really help myself. And I knew that a lot of other people did that too. But I was not able to write it. I didn't have the skill. I write every day on Leadership Freak, but I don't write narrative style. So I thought about who's the best I can think of. And I knew Bob Berg from The Go-Giver. And I contacted John David Mann, who wrote The Go-Giver with Bob. And I told him the story in a nutshell. And he said to me on the phone, Dan, I have chills. I love it. Let's do it. And that's how quickly it all happened. John, by the way, gets a lot of invitations to help people write books because he is one of the best. So I'm so thankful for him too. So I think the thing that comes to mind most frequently when I think about the big shift that's happened in my life is to invite people in, if someone shows up at your door unexpectedly, and I'm using this metaphorically, if someone shows up unexpectedly, my tendency would be to say no, but at least invite them in and, get to know them. And perhaps there is no relationship. Perhaps there is no business connection. Perhaps there's no way for you to serve them. That's okay. But just invite people into your life and learn from them because they make our lives bigger. I think that's perhaps one of the biggest shifts.
Okay, so 100% success leaves clues, and you've got to get out. I think all the magic happens outside your comfort zone when you let those people in. How did you manage to change that mindset, though, Dan, to go from being an introvert to actually inviting people in?
Well, I'll tell you, there have been some people in my life who persisted in trying to get into my life. And several years ago, I had a fellow who contacted me. He was going to be near me. I live in central Pennsylvania, which is the northeast of the U.S. And he said he was going to be in my area, and he wanted to, buy me lunch, and that happens. And I'm the kind of guy who kind of puts people off. No, I give an excuse. I'm busy. But I said yes to him. And then he followed up with me. And I put him off, and I put him off really for 2 or 3 years. I put him off, but he continued, and he's a very smart guy, and now we have regular conversations. So it was the persistence of others. My coach, I have a coach. I coach leaders. I have a coach. Several years ago, my coach contacted me and said, Dan, do you have a coach? I said, no. He said, would you like to have one? I said, no. And he just kindly and humbly persisted until finally we had a coaching conversation. And I left that conversation exhilarated. And after a while, even slow people like me, you start to see other people have so much to offer. Other people can make your life so much richer. So I'm thankful to those people who have persisted with me over the years, even though I say to some people, I'll say, if we're friends, you probably tried hard to make that happen. And that's not a good thing. I kind of joke about it, but that's not a good thing. So I'm thankful for the others who have reached into my life and tried to be helpful. And maybe, Stephen, for you, for people in your audience, there are people around us who are anxious to lift us, to encourage us, to help us go further, and we're not quite paying attention. You know what I mean? So I've learned to be open to that.
Brilliant. Well, I'm a founder member of Agents Together, where we started off, and I think we've now got 400 plus mentors that are mentoring well over, or I think close to 1,300 estate agents in the UK, which is absolutely incredible. Free of time as well. They do an incredible time. So anybody watching this, if you're an estate agent, letting agent, and you want some free mentoring, get in contact and I'll put you in touch with Agents Together. So Dan, it's great. So touching on coaching then, and you mentioned having a coach yourself. What has that coach helped you? And how has that coach further developed your successes? And what's the importance of a coach?
Well, my coach, first of all, exposed me to coaching, and this would be 10 years ago, probably. And then he's one of Canada's top coaches. He's written a book called Coaching for Engagement, which is a wonderful book. And he mentored me in coaching. He trained me in coaching. We went out and trained coaches together. And now I have my own coaching practice. So I would say that my coach changed my life. Now, why do you need a coach in your life? And let me just say this, Stephen. I think we have this attitude that somebody's broken and they need a coach to fix them, or somebody's, really not really doing that well and they need a coach so they can do better. And sometimes that's true, although I don't work with those people for the most part. I work with high-performing, highly motivated people who want to continue to excel. And that's, again, where someone with outside eyes, an outside perspective, someone who can listen to you with, and there's confidence so that you can make sure that your inner heart is private, someone that can sometimes make suggestions. For me, coaching is also asking questions that help people see themselves or see their path a little better. I'll give you an example, Stephen. I was just on with a fellow this week, wonderful younger leader, and he's working on his relationship skills. A lot of leaders are great at getting things done, but the relationship side is a little weaker. And so I said, what's your goal for this week? He told me what the goal was. I said, what do you plan to do? How do you plan to do that? And he gave me a couple of ideas. And then I asked him this question: what makes you think those things that you just said you're going to do will help you get where you want to go? And he looked at what he'd written down and he said, I don't think they will. You need somebody in your life who would just, and it wasn't me telling him that. He discovered it himself. Then we had to reflect again and say, well, what do you think will get you to where you want to go? So he had to circle around because, we think we're right, and we can be wrong when we think we're right, which is stunning to some of us.
Yeah, no, 100%. I belong to a business group, which I'm sure you've heard of. I think it used to be called Tech. It may now be called Vistage, which is over the world. And that was life-changing for me. I remember, and this is my leadership story for you, if you don't mind me sharing it for everybody. So I remember my MD, and I was very introverted as well. And I was a branch manager. I was one of the directors, actually. And my MD wanted me to expand on my leadership skills. And he belonged to Vistage. And there were 15 people in the group. And they were turning over businesses, £1 million to £100 million. And he said, Stephen, there's a leadership speaker in the morning. Can you come along and listen? You don't need to worry. You're just going to learn. I thought, great, fantastic. Half an hour before the end, the speaker goes, right, I've got a little exercise for you tomorrow. To do now. You're going away tomorrow on a 6-month sabbatical. You've got 5 minutes to make a speech. Go. And these are your team. And I was pouring with sweat. My heart was pounding. I was shivering. And then they went round to everybody, and I was the last one. And the MD knew how I felt. And he said, Stephen, look, you're a guest there. You don't need to do it. The facilitator said exactly the same thing. Stephen, you're a guest, don't do it. And my MD secretly going, please, Stephen, do it. Please, Stephen, do it. And actually I did it. And I'm sure it was out of sympathy. They all stood up. They all gave me a round of applause, which was amazing. I left there feeling fantastic. It still took me a year to join, but it helped me so much, and that was leadership. That was great leadership. That was inspiring. That helped me. The facilitator, my coach, my mentor, got me out of my comfort zone. So we would sit in this chair, and once I sat in the chair, I'd get a question. So whatever the question was, and I go, I don't know. So Stephen, if you did know the answer, what would it be? I don't know. And then 9 times later, eventually, I got the answer. So that was one of my biggest lessons in life. Everybody knows the answer. They just need help coaxing it from them. And that made a massive, massive difference. So thank you for allowing me to share that.
Oh, thank you for sharing it. I love it. You're right. So inspirational, isn't it? A little affirmation goes a long way, doesn't it? A little bit of
100%. So you touched on there, you work with some high performers and who wish to continue to excel, which is great. What are the other qualities you've noticed for top performers that you've come across? What makes a person a top performer?
Wonderful question. Wonderful question. Obviously, drive is important. We hear the word humility and we think, maybe that's sort of a doormat kind of person. And we don't want to give that impression at all. So I see people who have drive for themselves, but more importantly, drive to bring value to an organization, drive to bring value to their customers. And so they are high aspiration people. I think another quality of high performing leaders is they know what they do well and they know what they don't do well. And I think growing up, I thought I did everything well. I thought I knew, how everything was supposed to be done. And after a while, you realize, and one of the things I realized when I talk to the people I talk to, people like you, there are a lot of really smart, talented people in the world. So if you know what you are not good at, then you can then delegate effectively. You can improve yourself if you need to in a certain area, but knowing what you're good at and acknowledging that and being glad about it, and then also knowing what you're not good at is something that I see in people that really helps them go far.
Brilliant, thank you. So I know the Vagrant's about self-discovery, the story of self-discovery. So as a leader, you know, how do you go out and self-discover yourself? I hope I'm not going to give too much away in your book now, because obviously we want people to go onto Amazon and buy some copies.
Yes. No, no, I'm delighted to talk about it. The book has at the end 5 self-reflection practices. And so I think a big part of self-discovery has to do with self-reflection. One of the things I'm excited about is at the end of the book in those practices, one of them focuses on bringing the outside in, bringing others into your self-reflection practice. Because when you hear self-reflection, you think, well, that's private, that's just me, and there is a place for that. But self-reflection done in isolation leads to self-deception because, again, we can think we're doing the right thing and we can be confused about that. Some years ago, I read Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which is filled with these distortions and cognitive biases that we have that make us think we're making good decisions, but we're really not. And that book really rocked my world. So to solve that, one of the ways to solve that is to do your self-reflection more publicly. And that would include something like this. Suppose you have a team, you're running meetings, and everybody, not everybody loves meetings. Shall we say that? And so your goal is to run meetings everybody loves to attend. So you go to some of your colleagues, a couple of your trusted colleagues, and you say, look, I have this goal. I want to lead meetings. I want to lead meetings that energize people. I want people walking out more energized than when they walk in. Would you help me here? I'm going to you just monitor what is going on. And then they monitor and notice when energy goes up, notice when energy goes down, and then debrief with them right after the meeting. Just have a quick conversation. What did you notice? Thank them for their feedback. And now you have these jewels, these ideas that you can take home with you and reflect on and think, how, what's the way I would like to lead a better meeting? So other people, because you may think, oh, that was what I did in that meeting was fantastic. And someone else may not feel that way at all. So self-reflection is the journey toward, knowing who we are, self-awareness. That's a big part of it.
Okay, thank you. You noticed you talked about the Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow book. Are there any other books that have helped you along the way in your journey that you can recommend?
Well, you're asking.
I see you've got a lovely library behind you.
Yes. One of the wonderful opportunities that I had as I started writing Leadership Freak, I made a commitment that I would write it 5 days a week for a year to see if it got traction. I had no idea, Stephen, what that meant. None, because I had written contracts, I had written school papers, but I had never written online like this. But thankfully, it got traction. And then I started receiving fairly quickly, I started receiving books in the mail. And they, authors, they wanted to, have me read their book and then mention it on my blog. And I would say almost all the books that you see, I have other shelves, but almost all the books you see behind me have been sent to me over the years. And here's the joy of it. Many of them represent conversations. So I started to say when I received a book, if it was interesting to me, I'd write back to the publisher and say, could I have a conversation with the author? And they all want to. They love to have conversations about what they're doing. And I've learned so much I've learned so much from them. So I've strayed from your original question. Oh, books, books. So I had to tell you about, because I love books and I read several books at once. And by the way, I've given myself permission to not finish a book that I don't like. So, you read it, you're about halfway through and you think, this book is just not working. So I just put it back on the shelf. Now, sometime I may go back and get it. But I read about writing every day. And there's a whole section of my library that's out of view for you. That's books about how to write. Zinzer's book on writing, or Cameron's book on writing, called Finding Water. I'm looking over, and those books are so helpful to me. I think more recently, one of the people that has had a big influence on me is E.B. White. E.B. White wrote Charlotte's Web, wrote Stuart Little. A lot of people know that, but he wrote essays all his life, and I have them. And the reason those books have been so powerful is he is, in my opinion, the best writer of the 20th century. He is so talented as a writer. So I'm enjoying his work, and it helps me think, and I watch how he writes. So, and that helps me. I also read poetry. Like to read poetry. Right now, Donald Hall was the poet laureate. He passed away. But I've been reading Donald Hall's poetry as well. I read a lot. It would be hard for me to say one book.
Okay. Well, look, just coming back, and I'm conscious of time now, so thank you so much for your time. Something that I found really interesting was that you committed to writing your Leadership Freak blog 5 days a week. So for me, that shows consistency. How did you get in that mindset of doing it right? I'm going to do it every day, day in, day out. Because I'm sure there must have been days, and a lot of people struggle with consistency. In fact, that's my favorite C word.
Yes, it is a great word. And I think there are a lot of reasons why consistency is part of my life. Some of it is I was brought up on a dairy farm, and you got up in the morning and you did your chores. You didn't make the decision, am I going to do my chores today? I started learning that, early on, and I think that helped me. But I think today I love doing it, and I'm energized. Almost every day I'm energized by it. And that truly helps. If you're trying to force yourself to do something that you hate, maybe you need to find something else to do, because it's so much easier to be consistent with something that you love or that you see the value in. Like if you're learning to speak in front of others, Stephen, I know you have practiced learning to speak in front of others over the years, and you did it, and it was hard, and you're still probably working at being a good communicator, and you do it because it serves a noble purpose for you, and that also helps with consistency.
100%. One final question for you, and I'm fascinated by this. So implementation and taking action. So as a leader, you can come up with such fantastic ideas, and you want your colleagues to implement them and take action. And there are some great people that are action takers, and if it fails, it fails, but at least they do it. Whereas there are others that are just, oh, you know what, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it the next day, I'll do it the next day. How do leaders get their team to be that motivated to take action to see the results?
Yes, I have a couple of thoughts about this. There's lots of things to say about it. I think in meetings, we tend to talk about instead of talking to do. We talk about stuff, but we're not really talking about doing stuff, so what are we going to do? And that would be helpful to make that shift. Every meeting should end, or somewhere in the meeting should have a question like this: who does what by when? And if meetings have people in it that in them that people are leaving and they don't have anything to do time after time, they probably shouldn't even be in the meeting. Who does what by when? And then the last thing I would say about this, Stephen, is go ahead and give yourself permission to start small and have a short timeline. What can we get done this week so we can come back? Long timelines are difficult. So, 3 months from now, we're going to have this done. I don't have an attention span to 3 months. So just give yourself the permission to make some milestones that are small, fairly small goals at the beginning.
Fantastic. Look, I'm incredibly grateful for your time. I can't believe how quickly it's gone. How can people, one, get hold of you, two, get your blog, and three, get your book?
Yeah, so hopefully you can just go to a bookstore, but you can go to all the online suppliers, Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and those, they have it. Audible has it as well. So we're excited about that. You can email me at dan@leadershipfreak.com. And if you just go to Google and type in Leadership Freak, so far, I'm the only one.
Well, brilliant. Thanks very much for your time. I appreciate it's a lot earlier in America than it is in the UK, but I'm incredibly grateful, and have a good, productive, successful day and afternoon. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen.
My pleasure.